Good morning, everyone. Good morning. And welcome to the second plenary session of the 9th Summit of the Americas. The chair now recognizes Ms. Suzanne Clark, representative of the CEO Summit of the Americas. Suzanne.
Good morning, Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, Mr. Secretary, Mr. Chairman, several titles this morning. Thank you. I want to start by thanking the State Department and the Secretary for an incredible partnership and participation in the CEO Summit. I had the honor of walking with the Secretary around Innovation Alley yesterday, which was a great exhibit at the CEO Summit about some of America's exciting and innovative companies and what they want to do to help grow the whole hemisphere. We were also deeply appreciative of President Biden and Vice President Harris for each coming to address the hundreds of CEOs and C-suite executives in attendance and the thousands more who joined online. We are looking forward to a partnership with the administration on regional priorities over the next 2 years and beyond. And finally, I want to thank all of the heads of state and delegations, government leaders from across the Americas for your participation. I'm proud to join you today on behalf of the private sector. The U.S. Chamber of Commerce is the world's largest business organization, and we represent businesses of every size, every sector, every industry, in virtually every corner of the globe. We advocate for our members and partner with governments to tackle challenges and strengthen growth and opportunity, and we do it every single day. And through our global network of American Chambers of Commerce, including 33 great AmChams in this region and bilateral business councils, we strengthen ties between all of our countries. So it's not only been an honor for the U.S. Chamber to host the CEO Summit, it's been a really important opportunity for us to bring our members and businesses and networks to the table. Over the past 2 days, the CEO Summit has provided a platform for productive and insightful discussions featuring many of you, many of the leaders in this room, and CEOs and executives from some of the world's most exciting companies. And maybe most importantly, for small and medium-sized enterprises that are the primary generators of growth across our hemisphere. Every day, these companies, large and small, not only produce all of the goods and services we depend on, but they solve problems, they serve people, and they strengthen society. The business community stands in partnership with you in addressing the challenges before all of us. We focused on several of those challenges during the CEO Summit, each an opportunity for the public and private sectors to work together and drive action. I'll just say a quick few words about each. And if they sound familiar, they should, because we intentionally aligned the CEO Summit agenda with your priorities. The first is promoting a strong rule of law throughout the region. This is essential to making progress on any of the priorities for a really simple reason. Where robust institutions thrive, businesses and workers thrive. The private sector will support and build on important initiatives like the Alliance for Development and Democracy. We applaud the governments of Panama, the Dominican Republic, and Costa Rica for working collaboratively to strengthen democratic institutions and enhance transparency and predictability for companies. We will help demonstrate how their efforts will lead to new investment and more resilient supply chains. As the State Department announced earlier this week, the U.S. Chamber will undertake an assessment of hemispheric supply chains by surveying CEOs and chief logistics officers. We hope to help identify companies' priorities, analyze trade flows, and assess opportunities across our whole region. We look forward to launching this survey at an event bringing together businesses and leaders from the Alliance for Development and Democracy. Next is boosting trade. Trade doesn't just bring prosperity, it strengthens the ties of partnership and stability. Businesses import and export, make investments, and build supply chains, but we need our partners in government to help set the conditions for success. We will also continue to ensure that small and medium-sized businesses reap the benefit of greater economic engagement. This week, the U.S. Chamber and our member companies were proud to host a virtual SME Trading Academy. More than 3,000 small businesses from 20 different countries participated. We want to build on that success, work with our member companies and other partners to expand it so we can talk to more and more small and medium-sized companies in your countries. Third, the CEO Summit focused on building resilient health systems throughout the region. The U.S. government's newly announced America's Rise initiative is an important step forward. Our member companies have been pushing for that initiative. We want to formalize a regional public partnership and dialogue on the really important conversation on healthcare. The private sector has committed to bolstering that work. Our foundation at the Chamber will stand up a new Reliance Operations Center of the Americas to serve as a real virtual hub. So the next time a crisis hits, whether that's a natural disaster, whether that's a pandemic, there is a hub that we can go to support each other. Next, we know that we all have to support digital innovation, which supports greater growth, transparency, and, importantly, economic inclusion throughout the region. For our part, business is committed to work diligently to close the digital divide while advancing technologies, as we all saw accelerated in the pandemic. And we will work with your governments to establish consistent regulatory frameworks that will help expand connectivity and foster digital transformation. Finally, as we all know, we must work together to address the energy crisis that's confronting our region. We need to accelerate the production needed to drive down energy costs while continuing private sector-led innovation and investment needed for the energy transition. We can and we must do both to help families, businesses, to help strengthen our energy security in a volatile geopolitical environment, and to significantly reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Ladies and gentlemen, all of us share a common destiny. In a lot of ways, we rise and fall together as a region. We know that we can't solve every problem here this week, but the business community joins you with a commitment to drive progress, a commitment to the hard work, and a commitment to sustained action. This summit might be a moment in time, but it can set the course for action for months and years to come. And though we have spent a lot of time at this summit talking about the challenges, let's not forget about the opportunities. We have an opportunity to come back from the pandemic stronger than ever. Our hemisphere can be a leading exporter of energy, a premier destination for travel and tourism, and a model for human rights, the rule of law, and the prosperity that flows from each. We can do this. We can do it together. The U.S. Chamber of Commerce stands ready to work with each of you to do just that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Suzanne. The chair now recognizes the Honorable Gaston Brown, Prime Minister of Antigua and Barbuda.
Thank you very much, Mr. Secretary of State. I acknowledge my colleague heads, excellencies, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. While I'll register my regret that invitations to this 9th Summit of the Americas were not extended to all heads of government, I acknowledge that the crucial issues confronting our global community demand our urgent and collective attention. It is my hope that there will be no future summits to which any head of government of our Americas will be omitted. Indeed, we regard the trade embargo against Cuba as harmful to the promotion of peace and prosperity in this hemisphere. It should be ended. Similarly, we urge engagement with the government of Venezuela, allowing the country to use its resources for its people's needs and to play a peaceful and constructive role in our region. To achieve this, there is work to be done by all sides to narrow differences and establish cooperation in the interests of advancing economic, social, and political well-being of all the peoples of this hemisphere. Right now, there's a confluence of troubling global events that require our collective and strong leadership to recover from COVID-19 pandemic, to respond adequately to climate change, and to surmount the challenges of food insecurity and escalating oil prices. The inflationary pressures driving tens of millions of people in our hemisphere into abject poverty, requiring greater hemispheric cooperation on solidarity. As leaders, we must act urgently to bring the rising cost of living under control. However, the reality is that no one country can overcome these challenges. The widest possible hemispheric and international cooperation to mobilize our collective resources behind a clear plan of action is vital and must be encouraged and pursued. While I do not expect that this summit can produce a definitive plan, I hope that at least we can agree on its elements, including the identification of priorities and practical measures that can be implemented. Colleagues, we are at a defining moment. All of us need to summon the political will to act, and to act with purpose. Beyond the new and urgent challenges that confront us all, there are others that have lingered and festered for far too long. The important truth emanating from COVID-19 that no one is safe until all is safe applies equally to the overarching threat of climate change, to the conditions of underdevelopment that lead to irregular migration and refugees, to inappropriate and inadequate criteria for access to concessional financing, and to de-risking and financial exclusion of small economies from the international financial system. I draw special attention to the fact that for decades, the effects of climate change have repeatedly caused loss and damage to small states without any compensation. Our countries have suffered and continue to suffer, even though we are the least contributors to the cause of climate change. This is one of the greatest injustices that exist today, and it requires the attention of the United States and others. If we learn nothing else from the COVID-19 pandemic, it should be that we cannot legislate against cross-border effects of global issues, nor can we build walls to exclude them, or establish border patrols to turn them back. Lip service, neglect, and national interests may serve the wealthier countries among us for some time, but eventually, deteriorating conditions in the neighborhood will engulf us all unless we act, and we act now. What is urgently required is genuine international cooperation to remedy these ills, which have persisted relentlessly, forcing many small states to cope by borrowing on commercial terms. This borrowing to repeatedly repair infrastructure damaged by the impact of climate, and more recently, to finance extraordinary expenditure incurred in response to the COVID-19 pandemic, has enlarged our debt burden, leaving little fiscal space to build resilience and to construct the necessary physical infrastructure. In this connection, my government welcomes President Biden's announcement of a new America's Partnership for Economic Prosperity. My government is particularly pleased that President Biden's America's Partnership aims to mobilize new financing and to revitalize multilateral development banks, revamping their lending policies to better meet the specific needs of the majority of our nations. I remind, however, that many Caribbean countries have exhausted their borrowing capacity to respond to these exogenous shocks and need debt relief and post-COVID recovery assistance to shore up their tattered economies. Therefore, contracting more debt is not the answer. I also remind that, for no good reason, 6 CARICOM countries are denied membership of the Inter-American Development Bank, and therefore, access to their lending and investment. My government encourages President Biden to include in this new partnership the U.S. joining other developmental partners as a member of the Caribbean Development Bank, which services all CARICOM countries and is indispensable to our needs. My government applauds and celebrates renewed, reinvigorated, and sustained U.S. attention to the mutual economic prosperity of the U.S. and the nations of our hemisphere. President Biden is providing much appreciated leadership in this regard. But we recognize that the United States alone cannot do everything. Hence, we urge cooperation between the United States government and the other governments, such as China, which is playing a constructive role throughout Latin America and the Caribbean. In the areas of infrastructural development and the build-out of renewable resources of energy, collaboration between the US and China could accelerate the pace of economic transformation within our hemisphere. Colleagues, this summit should be remembered as the one which we got together as leaders of the Americas, confronted the barriers to the economic progress and prosperity of the large American family, and decided to act decisively to overcome them. That will be achieved not by declarations that we will issue, but by the actions we take to implement them faithfully and expeditiously. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Prime Minister. The Chair now recognizes the Honorable Philip Davis, Prime Minister of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas and Minister of Finance.
Secretary of State Tony Blyton, colleagues, prime ministers and presidents, delegates and representatives, citizens of the Bahamas and the wider Americas. Colleagues, I have come to Los Angeles, California, the city of angels, inspired by the words of the father of my nation, who once said, he searched for the heart and soul of the Americas. Today, the Americas are challenged by crises. Climate, COVID, and conflict have undermined our safety and our security. Have we done enough here at this gathering to relieve suffering, to promote peace, to fight for the economic dignity of our people? All the work and all the fine words do not count for much unless we can tell our people, whether they live in Old Bite Cat Island in the Bahamas, in Bridgetown, Barbados, or in Santiago, Chile, that we laid a true foundation for their progress. Of course, the real test will come when we all go our separate ways. Will the work we carried out here continue once the spotlight and the world's attention have moved on? Given that it's almost impossible to overstate what's at stake, we must hope that the answer to that question is yes. As we are aware, change is certain, but progress is not. It should be sobering for us all that the issues we are confronting at the Summit of the Americas are more dire and more urgent than those discussed at the first such summit 3 decades ago. That is evidence that the good intentions and the optimism of that gathering did not translate into enduring progress. Indeed, some countries in our hemisphere have become more unequal and more violent. Across the Americas, the scourges of racism and discrimination appear to be on the rise. Emerging moral and technological challenges to our democratic norms threaten our capacity to deliver free and fair elections and effective governance. And all these challenges are eclipsed by the existential threat of climate change. What each of these challenges have in common is that they cannot be solved by any one nation alone. For that reason, we offer President Biden and Vice President Harris and the people of the United States our warmest thanks and appreciation for their promotion of dialogue and cooperation and their hospitality. Multilateral engagement at the highest levels happens too infrequently, certainly when it comes to issues which are important to the Caribbean. But if the work of this summit continues, if the will to cooperate endures, if words turn into action, change can lead to progress, and we can move forward. Friends, June 1st marked the beginning of hurricane season. It is hard to describe what it's like to live in and lead a country that is several storms, or maybe even just one more Category 5 storm away from destruction. Even now, we are locked in a vicious cycle of devastation and recovery. In the last 20 years, at least 11 major storms have made landfall in the Bahamas. More than half of my country's debt can be directly linked to hurricanes. That means that the world's failure to slow carbon emissions constrains the decisions we make in the Bahamas every day. As hurricanes become more frequent and more intense, the waters and seas rise, and so do our debts. Yet, we need resources to make our infrastructure and our homes more resilient. That is why my country has advocated for the creation of dedicated, accessible, and affordable climate financing. Our seagrass and mangroves are playing, and that conservation and restoration can continue to play a critical role in acting as a carbon sink. These blue marine ecosystems capture up to dozens of times the amount of carbon as tropical rainforests. Carbon markets are an important bridge to a net zero future, and we will be the first country in the world to develop and trade blue carbon credits. Friends, at the summit, we have spoken much about the threats that cross borders, from viruses to carbon emissions to inflationary pressures to trafficking. Another such plague, surely, is disinformation. For all the promise and progress of technology, much of humanity now carries with them a personal device that can misinform, deceive, and divide as easily as it can educate, enlighten, and connect. Conspiracy theories are not harmless entertainment. They can undermine confidence in institutions, unduly influence democratic outcomes, and set one group of people against another. Does anyone doubt, after the last few years, that conspiracy theories can kill? Here again is a challenge no one country can solve alone. And those of us who cherish democratic freedoms of expression have a particular responsibility to cooperate in fighting for truth and transparency. Friends, COVID has ravaged our economies. Too many countries in the hemisphere have been neglected. We are grateful for the millions of doses of vaccines, but we must be mindful that the migration of healthcare professionals from the Caribbean to developed countries has been devastating for our healthcare systems. The Caribbean has lost healthcare professionals to the United States and Canada amid the worst pandemic of our life, making it harder to care for our own people. So I joined Prime Minister Belize in gratitude to the Cubans who came to our rescue in providing much-needed personnel. Friends, the dialogue and agreements which will emerge from this gathering are necessary precursors to much-needed action. Major conflicts around the world are made worse by the erosion of democracy in many corners. How we engage with countries where democratic values are declining is a major challenge of our times. It is easy to talk with those whom we agree, but we must also be able to talk to those with whom we don't agree. In fact, sometimes those are the conversations that are most urgently needed. All the countries in our hemisphere face overlapping developmental, security, and democratic challenges. Collaboration and collective action can only be of mutual benefit. The absence of the Republic of Cuba has made these deliberations less complete. We strongly affirm the need to always lead with consultation and diplomatic engagement, which is why we support efforts to breathe new life into the Inter-American Democratic Charter. The embargo against our Cuban neighbors, the longest such embargo in modern history, directly contributes to a rise in irregular migration, which heavily impacts my country. The easing of restrictions in 2016 led to a dramatic fall in irregular migration, a very welcome development for the Bahamas. We deeply regret its rescission and the corresponding rise in irregular migration which accompanied it. We also believe that more can be done to provide support for our brothers and sisters in Haiti. But that said, we also believe that this engagement must be led by the government and people of Haiti. For too long, the approach in the region has been about us, without us. We must commit to new tools and more focused engagement. Over the long term, we must also be mindful of the unintended consequences of isolation and separation. When we push away those with whom we disagree, they often take comfort in one another and deepen their alliances in the face of our hostility. A former American national security advisor described this as an alliance of the aggrieved. And such alliances can challenge our peace and security and disrupt other relationships. Friends, apart from the irregular movement of people, which I mentioned a few moments ago, the Bahamas is also being hard hit by the illegal transshipment of guns. We do not manufacture guns. Not a single gun is made in the Bahamas. We have witnessed an explosion in gun-related crimes that far too often end up in injury or murder. I strongly urge those states in the region which manufacture guns to continue to work closely with us to contain them within their own borders and do what you can to prevent such harmful proliferation. Surely, the right to bear arms cannot be interpreted as the right to traffic arms. Friends, in conclusion, we need to keep talking. We all need to keep talking. And we also need to keep doing, upholding our commitments and taking the action necessary for our collective survival. Often, it is when the talking stops that the fighting starts. And it's only when the talking starts that the fighting stops. If the institutions within our inter-American system are no longer fit for purpose, then let's rethink or recalibrate to whatever degree necessary in order that they may fulfill their potential. The Bahamas believes that the OAS in particular requires both a structural and cultural adjustment. Membership in any organization bestows privileges, but membership also confers responsibilities. And a basic expectation must be that members make good faith efforts to keep resourcing commitments to the organization. For almost a decade, staffing, projects, and programming at the organization have deteriorated. The OAS is, in many areas, a shell of its former self. My country's mission to the OAS has been charged with focusing on necessary OAS reform. We hope that other countries will join our efforts. Let this gathering fulfill its mission to drive change in the region for the better of us all. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Prime Minister. The chair now recognizes the Honorable Mia Mottley, Prime Minister of Barbados.
Bless my eyes this morning. The sun is on the rise again. The way earthly things are going, anything can happen. Mr. Secretary, there is so much trouble in the world. Excellencies, there is so much trouble in the world. Heads of government, there is so much trouble in the world. Heads of state, there is so much trouble in the world. I've chosen the language of Bob Marley this morning, not because I'm an apostle of Bob, as you probably have realized by now, but also because he reminds us of the day-to-day reality of our people and of our citizens. And we have come to Los Angeles hopeful that we're not just going to engage in speeches, or we're not just going to engage in platitudes, but we go home to make a difference to people at perhaps the most difficult time this world has seen in 100 years. We have 3 global crises, and any one is sufficient to bring us down. The climate crisis hurts from you here in California in fires, to us in the Caribbean through the heart attack of hurricanes, and the chronic NCDs of water crises and droughts, or floods, depending on where you go. We fight the pandemic. And even as we talk about the pandemic, we need to start to qualify it, because we fight the COVID pandemic without realizing that the slow onset pandemic of antimicrobial resistance is already upon us, being fueled further by how we farm, how we treat each other with the abuse of antibiotics, and how we literally allow those things to flow into our environment and contaminate our water system. And as if that was not enough, we now fight the prices of food and fuel and fertilizer, knowing full well that the only destination thereafter is going to be a debt crisis and an economic crisis if we do not intervene to break the slide. My friends, how much more evidence do we need? You see men sailing on their ego trip, blast off on their spaceship, million miles from reality. No care for you, no care for me. If I could have sung it, you would have joined me. But I don't need you to join me in the words of this song. I need you to join us in the chorus of action that our people need, not want. Our people need immediate intervention. 6-week crops and 12-week crops is what is going to feed our people. We need to be able to shield them from the price of fertilizer that is making their efforts almost impossible. We need equally to recognize, as you heard Prime Minister Brown and Prime Minister Davis say already this morning, that the debt crisis is already among many developing countries. We simply do not have the fiscal space to respond to crises not spawned by ourselves, but spawned by others. And we are facing a double jeopardy. Our countries were those from whom wealth was extracted in order to build the developed world. Our countries were left at independence with no compact, no money to finance basic rights of housing and healthcare and education. And when we fought to do it, now we find ourselves having those efforts crowded out, literally, by our inability to be able to face and find the money because we are using it to recover from climate crises, not of our own making. Where does the double jeopardy come? That it is the very industrial revolution that the blood, sweat, and tears of our ancestors financed that is now causing us not to be able to respond to the needs of our people in the most basic of ways that humanity requires. My friends, there is so much trouble in the world, and we think we've found a solution, but we want to tell people only about financing after the climate crisis. We need to be able to prepare before the crisis so we can reduce what we have to spend by 7 times. We need to recognize that adaptation has no private sector follower because there's no return on investment in adapting to the climate realities. That is the function of the state. And therefore, the international community is required in the justice of the moment to help us prevent loss of life and property for a crisis we didn't create. We need to reform the international financial institutions architecture. How can we have an international bank for reconstruction and development that does not reconstruct and develop in today's world? Where is the reconstruction from the climate crisis being financed? Where is the reconstruction from the pandemic being financed? The post-pandemic recovery? Where is the platform for middle-income countries that house 75% of the world's poor? But because they're middle income, we don't remember that. Where is the climate finance being targeted to, justifiably and fairly so, when the numbers show that only 15% of climate finance is going to the climate vulnerable countries? I've not come here just to use words. Let us be practical. We have a duty to solve a few problems. And I think that the format of this meeting needs to change if we are to be able to see real progress and not simply to be part of the problem. We need to talk with each other and not talk at each other as we are doing in set piece speeches. We need to engage and see how we can make a difference in a real way. We have migrants coming not because they choose to come, but because it is their last option. They don't choose to leave who they love and where they love willingly. And when they come, we now know that we don't need to treat them poorly, because this year has shown that there's a dignified way to treat migrants. We've seen that in Europe. We need to see it in the Americas. And I don't place that burden on the United States of America alone. I place it on all of us, including my own country, because we cannot be part of the solution by simply talking from outside and not literally putting our shoulders to the plow. The International Organization of Migrants needs our support. And we need to make sure that as we reform the Organization of American States, that instead of it seeking to become a political player, it needs to become a player that simply brings opportunity to our people in the Americas, from Alaska to Chile. And how does that come? If we did nothing else in the next decade in the OAS, but to allow our people to become bilingual and trilingual, people under 18 and adults, then we would change the economic possibilities of this hemisphere in ways that we can't even contemplate. We need to ensure that if we fight this climate crisis in justice, then we fight it not just as small island developing states and developing countries calling for fairness for our nations, but we provide that fairness to our people. And how do I mean? We have taken a decision in Barbados that there can be no award of any contracts for renewable energy without taking into account the bounty that must go to our people. And therefore, accordingly, this year I announced that every rooftop that is owned by anyone in Barbados will have the right to have placed on it, as of right, not a choice, not a right to apply, as of right, photovoltaic systems from 2.5 kilowatts to 5 to 10 to 20. Why? Because we don't own individually the wind, the sea, and the sun. It is the patrimony of the nation. And if we are to move our people out of poverty, then we must use the bounty that is afforded to us through renewable energy, good jobs, but also good investment to allow our people to benefit. And we ask you to recognize that we must not only engage in platitudinous comments about what we can achieve with net zero. Net zero does not mean fossil fuel free. It means still that there will be 20% energy coming from fossil fuels. We know natural gas is that clean fuel. But as we do it, let us recognize that it is not possible to exclude those developing countries who have now the opportunity to finance their way to net zero simply because we want to keep the world in the construct of the old imperial order in which it is found. Whether it is the reform of the international financial institutions or whether it is moving ourselves into a new reality, we cannot continue to cement the inequalities of an old imperial order. And that is why I've come also to thank President Biden and Vice President Harris. For too long, there has been benign neglect. And the Partnership for the Americas, as well as the Climate Partnership Pact 2030, offers us a real possibility of hope. But it is up to each of us to keep and hold each other accountable. We are happy that coming out of yesterday, we made progress that we didn't see the day before. And we hope that tomorrow we will build on the subcommittees that will make a real difference on energy security, food security, and finance access that will mean that we can look our people in the face and say we have done right by you. We cannot achieve it overnight, but we are moving in the right direction. And we must also address the reality of exclusion. Not only exclusion of individuals in our society through racism and class prejudice, but exclusion of countries from the ability to participate in the financial system by having us de-risked, by having correspondent banks. Belize, 83% of its banks have been de-risked. How do the people of Belize do trade with the rest of the world, with the United States of America, if their people can't bank, can't send remittances, if we are told that our institutions are too small to matter, and therefore it is better not to do business with us? Are we to become financial pariahs in a world at the same time that we seek to bring equity? There is so much trouble in this world. If we think we've found a solution, it must not, in the words of Bob, be another illusion. We ask you to also recognize that let us use our cooperative efforts to build joint platforms for procurement so that we can reduce the price of critical goods, from vaccines to water pipes to all other kinds of things that are impairing our ability to deliver proper services to our people. Africa did it with the African Medical Supplies Platform. Why can't we have an American supplies platform that treats to the most critical supplies? And why? In the Caribbean, we make an order and they say, what? That's too small for us. We announced a tax holiday for electric vehicles. We cannot get the supply of electric vehicles. Will Brazil help us? Will India help us? Will the United States or will Canada help us? We can't get access to batteries in order to help us become net zero by 2030. But yet we want to come on these platforms and talk about it. These are the real problems that I hope Pact 2030 will allow us to solve. And when we finish with Pact 2030, Canada and Chile and all of the others, can we create that platform for that joint procurement to reduce the price of supplies and to guarantee access to our people? My friends, I've spoken too long, but I cannot leave this platform without saying that we have to speak some home truths to each other. It's wrong that Cuba and Venezuela, Nicaragua are not here because, as you heard from Bahamas, that we need to speak with those with whom we disagree. And we don't only need to narrowcast. That's the part of the problem of the world. There's too much narrowcasting instead of broadcasting. There's too much talking at instead of talking with. But secondly, those countries must equally recognize that you cannot want to fully participate if you're not prepared equally to engage and to see progress. And the simple priority must be people, not ideology. If we can make progress for people, if we can allow people to speak different languages, if we can create a minimum floor of education and healthcare for the people of the Americas, then, my friends, the City of Angels would have played its role in the history of the Americas. I hope that we leave here today conscious that we must never again come to a summit to talk at each other, but simply to talk with each other in partnership and for the purpose of the prosperity of our people. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much, Prime Minister. In the words of Bob, no woman, no cry. Don't shed no tears. Let's act. We can sing a redemption song together. Thank you. The chair now recognizes His Excellency, Jair Bolsonaro, President of the Federal Republic of Brazil. Mr. President.
Mr. Anthony Blinken, Secretary of State, Chiefs of State and of Government, Mr. Luis Almagro, Secretary General of the Organization of American States, Congressman Arthur Lira, the Speaker of the House in Brazil, and ministers with me. Ladies and gentlemen, I thank you for your invitation from the United States to participating in this meeting of democratic leaders in the Americas. The Summit of the Americas is the opportunity to deal with the challenges of the post-pandemic of sustainable development with the energy transition, digital transformation, integration, as well as democracy and human rights. We are very attentive to the economic problems affecting the world, like inflation, unemployment, and especially the most precious good for the human being, his or her freedom, including the freedom of expression, of work, and faith. Brazil has engaged strongly in the negotiating process within the declarations to be approved in this summit. We are going to work together so these proposals lead to new cooperation engines for the economic growth of the Americas. Brazil feeds 1 billion people. We ensure food security for 1/6 of the world population. Without our agribusiness, half of the world would be hungry. Brazil not only avoided a food crisis with the access to fertilizers, but also they had a role of developing in looking for solutions on the world for food security. We are one of the countries that most preserve the environment and its forests. We have the most diversified and developed energetic matrix in the world, even losing part of our native forests, but only using 27% of our territory for cattle raising and agriculture. We are a sustainable agricultural nation. We do not need the Amazon region to expand our agribusiness. Only in the Amazon biome, 84% of the forest is intact, holding the greatest biodiversity in the planet. Our challenges are proportional to our size. I remind you that the area of the Amazon is equivalent to the area of the entire Western Europe. No other country has a environmental legislation so complete. Our forest code should be an example to other countries. In fact, we are responsible for less than 20% of the carbon emissions, even being the 9th economy in the world. In order to protect our forests, the federal government has reinforced combating deforestation and has established activities to preserve the biome in the Amazon. With the launch of the Methane Zero program, we have implemented commitments established during COP6 to structure treatment of organic residues, milk products, and landfills in order to reduce 30% of the emissions of methane in Brazil. We are pioneers in energetic transition. We started decarbonization more than half a century ago with biofuels and other sources. In 2021, we hit the record of installation of wind energy, 21 gigawatts, and sun power with 14. 85% of the energy generated in Brazil comes from renewable sources. We have the potential to additional production of energy of 60 gigawatts, equivalent to 4 times our installed capacity, or 50 Itaipu power plants. The wind power generation in the Northeast can generate ammonia for exports. In this moment that many developed countries use fuels, we promote totally clean energy and totally devoid of emissions. We see in Brazil now, in part of the world, we clear attack to the freedom of human beings to opine in different ways. I leave here a message for the Americas as a prosperous and democratic region. We have participated in many hemispheric forums working for democracy, for freedom, for prosperity, economic and social. In this year in which Brazil celebrates 200 years of independence, we are a country that believes in God, respects its military, is favorable to life since its conception, defends the family, and gives loyalty to its own people. Brazil, we understand that freedom is a higher good than life itself, because men and women without freedom have no life. Before concluding, I would give you some information that is of interest to all of us that we can share with the world. From last Sunday, when we had the information that 2 citizens, one British, Dom Phillips, and a Brazilian, Bruno Araújo, disappeared in the Javari Vale in the Amazon region. From that moment on, our military, the armed forces, have started a search to find those people. We ask God that they may be found alive. 2, I'd like to say to everybody that Brazil, that continues to concede humanitarian visas to Afghans, Ukrainians, Syrians, and Venezuelans. We do have a potential in the Americas of the activities in our Itaipu Lake or reservoir, where we will be also dedicating it to grow fish, and we will be able to present to the market 40% of the supply. This Secretary of Fisheries, George States, has done this, and I would like to also tell the President of Argentina, our dear Fernandez, continues in our discussions that this agreement in gas will continue for both of our countries and will continue to import gas from Bolivia. I would also like to say to all from the presidents from Guyana and Suriname that our visit to our recent visit to our countries is intended to collaborate with the oil and gas situation in your countries. You have reserves in oil and gas equivalent to 90% of the Brazilian reserves. I am sure that together with other partners, your countries will finally be highlighted in the world scenery. Today, I was President Biden with the extended bilateral and also in a reserved one. We were for 30 minutes seated without a mask and less than a meter away. And I felt from Mr. Biden need to solve problems that, including some that are not on our responsibility, but we're able to discuss alternatives to end the conflicts in the world, and all of us working in this manner will reach our objectives, especially with the U.S. government. The experience that I had yesterday with President Biden was tremendous. I am very relieved. I believe his words, and I believe in what we reservedly dealt with. To all of you, thank you very much, and may God bless our countries.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. The chair now yields to the Secretary of Health and Human Services, Javier Becerra of the United States, to preside as chair. Javier.